The boat market is facing a shakeup that's bigger than most people realize. 9 huge boat brands are gearing up to close stores nationwide in 2026, signaling a downturn that touches far more than showroom floors. Dealers are drowning in aging inventory, lenders are sending warning memos, and used boats are pushing new models into deeper trouble. And when those locations disappear, the ripple hits everyone: coastal towns, lake communities, service techs, rental fleets, even longtime boat owners who rely on steady support. It's the start of a major reset. Let's start with number 9. Bayliner. Walk into certain coastal dealerships today, and you can feel the shift before anyone speaks. Attention tied directly to Bayliner's fading presence. Several retailers across coastal and inland regions have reported inventory aging well beyond what their floor plan lenders consider manageable, creating a steady drain of interest charges that grow heavier every month. The growing pressure appears first in the markdown tags that appear quietly, without promotions or seasonal events, signaling that these cuts are not sales tactics, but signs of financial urgency. Bayliner built its reputation on affordability. Yet, that advantage has narrowed sharply because interest rates shifted from the low digits into ranges that many first-time shoppers no longer qualify for, leaving boats that once moved reliably now stuck under sun and dust. Material costs climbed as well, with fiberglass, aluminum, and resin increases pushing production expenses far above earlier levels, forcing retail prices higher at the exact moment household confidence weakened. Buyers adjusted quickly, turning toward used listings that carry lower financial risk, and that shift flooded local markets with boats priced just low enough to pull attention away from new Bayliner stock. Dealers now face inventory stacks that cost them more each day because floor plan financing builds interest every sunrise, and lenders have begun pushing harder for faster turnover to reduce their own exposure. Some multi-location dealerships have already trimmed Bayliner allocations by noticeable margins, choosing instead to expand floor space for brands that show steadier movement and healthier depreciation patterns in the current climate. These decisions rarely reverse quickly because lenders track aging days closely and rarely loosen shipment approvals once a brand begins falling behind market pace. Anyone visiting a dealership today will notice the signs immediately, from the soft dust on hulls to the handwritten markdown sheets layered over earlier reductions, each one showing how urgently retailers want these units moving before interest charges pile too high to manage. The pattern is consistent across states, pointing toward leaner distribution ahead, because no store can afford repeated months of negative carrying cost, while demand remains unstable and financing approvals remain tight. Bayliner has weathered downturns before, but this cycle exposes structural pressure from costs, credit tightening, and shifting buyer psychology, creating a path that leads directly toward reduced store presence as retailers prioritize survival over inventory breadth. If Bayliner's retreat feels significant, wait until you see the brand just ahead, where the warning signs deepen into something far harder to ignore. Lund. Across the northern lake regions, a quiet pullback is underway, and the ripples point straight toward Lund's tightening footprint. The shift began when interest rates moved out of the comfortable low ranges and into levels that lenders described as high risk for recreational financing, a phrase that shows up repeatedly in internal lending memos from regional banks in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula. Those memos highlight a drop in approvals for boat loans under $100,000, falling by what one lender spelled out as 41%. A decline steep enough to choke the flow of buyers who traditionally supported Lund's steady inland demand. Dealers now face rows of Lund units sitting through entire seasons, building carrying costs that turn each quiet month into another financial setback, pushing some to quietly reduce floor space to protect what margin they can still defend. What makes this moment different for Lund is the combination of material cost increases and shifting buyer psychology, a pairing that is harder to overcome than a simple seasonal slowdown. Aluminum prices rose repeatedly through earlier quarters, with suppliers quoting increases that forced manufacturers to absorb or pass along those expenses, and those adjustments pushed retail pricing upward at the exact moment that households grew more cautious. Shoppers, who once viewed Lund as an attainable upgrade, now compare new pricing to the growing supply of used listings, many posted by owners eager to exit their loans before depreciation widens. As used inventory expands, dealers must compete against boats priced low enough to pull attention away from showroom stock, deepening the slowdown and reducing dealer confidence heading into the next cycle. These pressures create a loop that rarely corrects quickly, because once lenders observe prolonged aging days, they adjust shipment approvals and limit exposure, leaving dealerships with fewer incoming units and less support. Several multi-location groups in the northern region have already trimmed Lund orders, citing uncertainty rather than dissatisfaction. And those reductions translate into thinner coverage across entire counties. Buyers may notice longer waits for parts and fewer staffed service bays, signs that a brand is tightening operations to weather a rough stretch. Lund has navigated downturns before, but the combination of high rates, rising material costs, and slower buyer commitment points toward a leaner presence through 2026, with decisions driven less by optimism and more by the clear math shaping today's strained market. Lund's slowdown sets the stage, but what follows reveals a shift that carries even heavier consequences across entire lake regions. If this breakdown is helping you see the market clearly, hit like, subscribe for the next update, and leave a comment so others understand shifts. Sea hunt. Along the southeastern shoreline, something subtle but undeniable is happening as Sea Hunt's once steady momentum begins to stall. Several store owners along the Carolinas and the Gulf Coast shared that their commercial insurance premiums jumped between 28 and 63%, a shift documented in long-form risk reports issued to them by their regional providers, and that spike alone reshaped how many of them order new Sea Hunt inventory. When a dealer pays more to keep the doors open than they once did, the first adjustment is always a reduction in incoming units, and once that trend starts, it rarely reverses quickly. Along coastal towns where Sea Hunt once moved reliably, buyers now find patches of inventory sitting longer than expected, watching markdowns arrive without explanation because floor plan interest does not wait for good weather or stronger sentiment. Dealers also noted that buyers have grown more cautious as storm-related repairs and maintenance costs climbed, with some pointing to long-form insurer disclosures, showing higher deductibles and stricter coverage rules for saltwater craft. Sea Hunt's strength has always been dependable construction paired with practical design, yet even solid products struggle when ownership costs rise faster than household confidence. Used listings have expanded steadily across multiple states, offering boats priced low enough to pull attention away from showroom inventory. And that shift forces dealers to sit on new Sea Hunt stock for longer than their financing agreements comfortably allow. The moment aging days stretch past the limits lenders accept, pressure intensifies, and dealers begin to trim allocations or reduce their commitment altogether. Several locations in South Carolina and Georgia have already shifted to leaner ordering, a move that signals less coverage ahead. These changes do not indicate failure in Sea Hunt's craftsmanship. They reflect a market adjusting to higher risk and tighter budgets, where dealers must protect margins even if it means reducing brand visibility for a season or two. As more retailers weigh their exposure, the footprint of Sea Hunt across coastal regions may narrow, leading to longer waits for service appointments and fewer authorized technicians. Buyers already see subtle signs, from extended repair timelines to parts orders that take longer than they once did. And those delays paint a clear picture of a network under tightening stress. If Sea Hunt's strain raised your eyebrows, the story unfolding in the next brand will raise far bigger questions about where the market is heading. Tracker, who once depended on dependable turnover, are noticing a pattern that leads directly to Tracker's sudden slowdown. Managers who reviewed full quarterly revenue sheets from their large outdoor chain partners explained that their boat departments delivered meaningful declines across numerous locations, and those stores historically depended on Tracker to anchor their yearly numbers. One sheet described a downturn that mirrored patterns last seen during the earlier post-recession years, signaling that the slowdown is not tied to a single region, but is spreading across several territories at once. Dealers noted that household confidence weakened at the exact time loan approvals tightened, and that combination immediately changed how long new Tracker boats remained on their lots. Boats that once moved within a predictable number of days now sit through multiple cycles of markdowns, each revision reflecting growing pressure from lenders monitoring aging inventory. Floor plan financing agreements do not give stores unlimited time, and when units reach those upper thresholds, interest charges stack faster than earlier seasons, diminishing margins and forcing uncomfortable decisions. Much of Tracker's strain grew from production momentum that carried too far beyond the demand peak. During the surge period, manufacturing volume expanded to match aggressive buying patterns, and that output level stayed elevated even as households pulled back. When demand softened, boats filled storage yards faster than they exited showrooms, leaving units stretching into overflow rows that some dealers had not used in nearly a decade. Boats parked in those areas rarely move at full value, and lenders monitoring those trends quickly send advisories pushing retailers to reduce aged units immediately, language that signals concern rather than suggestion. Dealers shared that they received these long-form notices earlier this cycle than ever before, indicating how quickly lenders want to limit exposure. Once lenders shift tone, dealers follow, and several Midwestern and Southern groups have already reduced Tracker allocations to protect their overall financial position heading into the next year. Service operations, which normally help stabilize a dealership during slow sales periods, have also felt pressure. Staffing adjustments, parts delays, and tighter repair queues reduced the support structure that many dealers rely on to carry them through uneven quarters. Without that buffer, the importance of fast turnover increases, and any brand with slower movement becomes a heavier burden. That is why numerous multi-location groups have already trimmed Tracker allocations for the upcoming season, choosing to narrow commitments until demand stabilizes and inventory levels return to a healthier baseline. Tracker's situation turns the pressure dial, yet the brand coming up pushes that pressure into territory dealers hoped would never arrive. Cobalt. Luxury-leaning lake towns are seeing a different kind of silence this season, one shaped by Cobalt's unexpected retreat. The shift began when financing for large recreational purchases tightened at a pace that caught many retailers off guard, with lenders issuing long-form advisories that approvals for loans above $200,000 had fallen by over one-half compared to earlier cycles. That collapse in financing power hit Cobalt harder than most, because the brand depends on buyers who rely heavily on structured loans rather than cash purchases. When those approvals dried up, the entire channel slowed, and the slowdown was amplified by rising material costs that pushed retail prices upward at the worst possible time. Fiberglass, labor, transport, and component inflation drove production expenses higher, leaving dealers with boats that carried extraordinary value, but exceeded what hesitant households could commit to during a period of economic uncertainty. Dealers across inland lakes, coastal regions, and major recreation hubs explained that their Cobalt units aged well past historical norms, some crossing thresholds that triggered lender warnings for immediate action. Those warnings matter because floor plan financing rules charge interest daily on unsold stock, and once a boat sits too long, the carrying cost begins to erode whatever margin a dealer hoped to preserve. Several multi-store dealership groups confirmed they trimmed their Cobalt allocations heading into the next year because they could no longer risk holding high-value inventory that required extended windows to sell. That decision does not reflect disappointment in the brand's craftsmanship. It reflects a financial environment that punishes slow movement and rewards cautious ordering. In several markets, used Cobalt boats also surged onto listings at strategic prices, drawing attention away from new stock and adding pressure to retailers who depend on turnover to keep financing costs predictable. These conditions have created a cycle where dealers reduce exposure, and reduced exposure leads to thinner regional coverage. With fewer units arriving, service networks begin to run leaner, parts availability stretches, and customers start noticing longer timelines for repairs or warranty work. That strain communicates a message the brand never intended to send: that the support infrastructure is tightening, even when product quality remains strong. Cobalt's contraction says plenty, though the developments waiting for what's coming next will show just how wide this pullback may spread. If you want the rest of this list as soon as it lands, subscribe now and stay ahead of changes that could reshape what happens. Grady White. Step inside any major saltwater showroom and the signs appear quickly, evidence pointing toward Grady White's shrinking reach. Coastal regions have seen operating costs climb sharply, with marinas issuing long-form statements documenting slip fee increases, insurance requirements, and storm zone risk adjustments that pushed ownership expenses far beyond earlier seasons. Dealers who carried Grady White through strong years explained that their inventory aging reports now stretch into ranges they never experienced before, forcing them to confront floor plan interest charges that drain margins with surprising speed. Several of them shared data from their own internal tracking sheets, showing units sitting past the 270-day mark, a threshold that lenders rarely tolerate without demanding immediate reductions in aged stock. Once those warnings arrive, the financial tone changes, and dealers begin protecting themselves by limiting incoming shipments for the next cycle. Part of the challenge for Grady White stems from the rising cost of offshore ownership itself, because storm insurance premiums have climbed in multiple coastal states. Repair labor rates have increased in busy service hubs, and the combined effect has narrowed the field of buyers willing to commit to long-term ownership. Some dealers shared long-form maintenance logs showing that routine repairs cost noticeably more than they did only a few seasons ago. And households that once upgraded confidently now hesitate, fearing cost escalation that might continue. When buyers pause, new inventory slows, and when new inventory slows, dealers begin refining their commitments to safeguard their remaining margin. This creates a cycle that grows harder to reverse the longer it continues. That tightening cycle is why several retailers have already reduced their Grady White allocations heading into the next season, choosing to favor brands with quicker turnover and lower exposure to coastal risk adjustments. These decisions echo across regions because fewer units mean thinner parts inventory, longer repair timelines, and service departments operating under pressure they never expected to face. Buyers walking into these stores encounter staff members who admit that ordering no longer feels responsible in the climate. As these conditions spread, the brand's regional footprint may contract in steps rather than sudden closures, but the direction is unmistakable. Grady White's retreat is significant, but the next brand exposes vulnerabilities that cut deeper than anyone expected. Bennington. Pontoon-heavy markets that once thrived are showing stress fractures, and every one of them traces back to Bennington's reduced output. Boats that once sold with steady momentum now sit through entire seasons, building interest charges that floor plan lenders will not ignore. Dealer groups, reviewing their previous allocation sheets, found that production rose too aggressively during the post-surge cycle, with increased output continuing long after household confidence had cooled. Those mismatched volumes left retailers holding pontoons far beyond normal aging periods, and several of them admitted that the carrying cost alone pushed them into unplanned markdowns long before peak selling months arrived. Once boats sit beyond those upper thresholds, every additional week becomes a financial strain, and those strains accumulate in ways that reshape ordering decisions heading into the next season. The pressure on Bennington intensified when used pontoons began flooding the market at prices that undercut new inventory by margins that buyers could not overlook. Owners who bought during the elevated cycle now face depreciation curves steeper than they anticipated, and many have listed their pontoons sooner than planned to avoid further loss. Dealers shared long-form internal summaries showing how used listings grew sharply across multiple states. And those listings moved faster than new units that carried higher financing expectations and dealer-imposed carrying costs. When buyers can choose a gently used pontoon at a significantly lower price, hesitation toward new inventory becomes the default reaction. And that hesitation slows turnover at the exact moment dealers need movement most. Once turnover slows, lenders begin pushing for reductions in aged units. And those advisories create pressure that no dealership can ignore without consequence. Service departments are feeling pressure as reduced shipments shrink parts inventories, limit technician availability, and extend repair queues for customers expecting quicker turnaround. Buyers now face delays reflecting a network operating under constraint. As dealers reduce exposure and tighten orders, Bennington's footprint thins, signaling a quieter presence driven not by craftsmanship issues, but by economic math and growing buyer hesitation. The contraction is not rooted in a failure of craftsmanship, but in the economic math surrounding production, depreciation, and buyer hesitation, a combination that leaves Bennington bracing for a leaner cycle defined more by caution than expansion. Bennington's tightening footprint tells a story, but the next brand reveals a struggle that reaches far beyond pontoons. Hurricane. Tourism-driven lake communities are feeling a shift first, and the pressure quietly circles around Hurricane's thinning support network. Dealers who supplied boats to tourism-driven lakes, coastal towns, and warm-weather travel hubs explained that their fleet buyers dramatically reduced orders after reviewing long-form demand reports showing a meaningful decline in boating activity. Those summaries highlighted softening numbers across several key regions, and that weakness immediately reshaped how new Hurricane units moved through dealer lots. Fleet operators who once refreshed their boats each season trimmed budgets sharply, leaving retailers with pontoons and deck boats aging past comfortable thresholds, accumulating floor plan interest charges that rise each day. When boats sit longer, the cost to keep them becomes heavier, and that cost forces dealers to mark down units earlier than planned simply to prevent further erosion. The downturn tightened further when a major lake destination liquidated a large portion of its rental fleet, pushing well-maintained used Hurricane boats into the market at prices dealers could not match. Buyers compared those units with new inventory and gravitated toward the lower-priced option, especially when the used boats carried complete service logs and lighter upfront commitments. Internal dealer summaries showed those used boats sold rapidly, creating a competitive imbalance that deepened the slowdown for new Hurricane inventory. Once buyers focused on discounted alternatives, movement in showroom stock slowed dramatically. Lenders tracking aging inventories then issued advisories directing dealers to reduce older units immediately. And those advisories signaled a financial environment shifting from patience to pressure. Several multi-location groups confirmed they adjusted upcoming Hurricane orders downward, recognizing that carrying high-aging units through another season would strain their margins at a dangerous pace. Service departments are also feeling the tightening, as reduced shipments lead to slimmer parts, shelves, smaller technician teams, and longer repair queues for customers who previously expected fast turnaround during peak months. Dealers reported that certain components now require extended lead times because suppliers are adjusting production based on the same softened projections, affecting the retail side of the business. As these delays grow, hesitation among potential buyers increases, sending a subtle but unmistakable signal through the market that Hurricane's network is bracing for leaner capacity rather than expansion. Dealership groups across several regions admitted that they cannot justify carrying wide selections of Hurricane inventory until tourism indicators stabilize, lending standards ease, and the balance between new and used pricing returns to levels that support consistent turnover without exposing them to rising interest burdens that threaten their seasonal profitability right now overall. Hurricane's challenges signal a shift, though the name waiting at the top of this list shows just how serious the downturn has become. Yamaha boats. Talk to service departments across the country, and a pattern emerges instantly. A pattern shaped by Yamaha boats struggling to maintain pace. Several dealers explained that their repair queues have grown noticeably longer because engine components, electrical modules, and specialty hardware no longer arrive on the predictable timelines they once relied on. That slowdown has forced customers into waiting periods that stretch well beyond earlier seasons. And those delays create hesitation that directly affects new inventory turnover. Every day a unit sits unsold adds interest to floor plan financing, and dealers carrying Yamaha boats through extended repair windows feel that pressure sooner than most. When lenders issue notices reminding them of aging inventory thresholds, the urgency rises further, and that dynamic has already pushed multiple retailers to adjust their upcoming orders. In earlier years, these boats moved fast enough to absorb occasional supply hiccups, but today's slower rhythm leaves stores more exposed to carrying costs than they can comfortably manage. The financial strain deepened when insurance carriers recalculated their risk assessments for jet propulsion boats, placing Yamaha boats in categories that now require significantly higher premiums for households in coastal regions and high-traffic inland markets. Dealers shared long-form explanations from insurers showing increases that climbed past the 34% mark year over year. And those numbers were enough to push numerous buyers away from new purchases entirely. Many turned to used listings with documented histories, hoping to avoid higher coverage requirements and the rising cost of new ownership. As used units entered the market at lower prices and with fewer insurance surprises, they undercut fresh inventory on dealership floors, slowing movement even further. That slowdown left some retailers holding Yamaha boats through multiple seasons, which magnified the impact of floor plan interest and prompted discounts earlier than they preferred. Once those early markdowns appear, the cycle becomes harder to reverse, because buyers grow accustomed to waiting for price reductions. As these conditions spread through the network, dealer groups across coastal towns, inland lakes, and major recreation hubs trimmed their Yamaha boats allocations for the next cycle, choosing to protect margins rather than gamble on extended sales timelines. Reduced allocations translate directly into thinner regional coverage, longer service wait times, and tighter parts availability for the households that previously counted on quick turnaround. With those realities shaping dealership decisions, Yamaha Boats moves toward 2026, under a restrained footprint defined by cautious ordering, slower turnover, and a financial climate that demands leaner operations across the regions that once saw its strongest momentum. And there it is, the 9 boat brands facing major store closures across America in 2026. Some of these shifts were predictable, but others caught even dealers off guard. If you've seen signs like this in your area, or you're already feeling the impact, I want to hear about it. Drop your experience in the comments. Every story helps more people understand what's really happening. If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update.